Welcome to lesson 2 of our cultural competence training. My name is Desiree Cochran Norfolk. This lesson is about cultural identity development. So we're going to explore how cultural identity is going to take shape and how it evolves and how it's going to influence our counseling process. We know identity development is not static. It's a lifelong journey that's going to be influenced by our family and our community and our environment and our friendships and even some of those broader social forces like racism, sexism, ageism, systemic oppression, what have you. So for counselors, understanding identity development is vital because it's going to help us to contextualize client experiences. We want to avoid stereotyping and intervene in some ways that are going to validate and support our clients' lived realities. So as you're going through this lesson, I want you to think about your own identity journey and how your background influences the way that you see your clients, and how your background also influences how you're looking at power and that counseling relationship. So to understand identity development, we need to define some key constructs here. Culture is the shared traditions, the values and practices that shape worldview and behavior. And race is a social construct that's tied to power hierarchies, and ethnicity is going to be a person's heritage, their traditions, their shared identity. Enculturation is the process by which people are learning and maintaining their culture of origin. And cultural identity development is how people are internalizing and rejecting and synthesizing cultural influences over their lifespan. So these constructs are going to remind us that identity is multidimensional and it's always developing. So for example, a client's racial identity might be at one developmental stage, while their gender or their spiritual identity may be at a completely other stage. So our job as counselors is to really assess where a client is in their journey, and we want to support them without judgment. So let's start with Cross's nigrescence model. This is one of the earliest and most influential racial identity models. Nigrescence is literally meaning the process of becoming Black. So he has multiple stages here. There's 5 stages, and the first one is pre-encounter. This is where people are internalizing negative stereotypes about Blackness and they're idealizing whiteness. And then they have the encounter, which is a pivotal event, which often involves racism, and it's going to challenge those previous beliefs. And then the third phase is the immersion or immersion phase, where the people are going to immerse themselves in Black culture and they're going to reject the white culture. And then they move into internalization. Their identity becomes more stable. They have a positive connection to Blackness, those forms of Blackness. And then the last one is the internalization commitment stage. This is just a deepened identity with a commitment to social justice and community empowerment. So Cross later streamlined that model into 3 thematic categories. So the pre-encounter, the immersion, and the internalization. And this model is going to highlight how identity is dynamic and it's shaped by both the internal reflection and the external encounters with racism. And there's a couple of other models out there that have kind of stemmed from this, and you can do your research on that. But to begin with, this was the initial model, and it's still kind of relevant today. Janet Helms advanced the racial identity theory with 2 major models. So the color identity model, or people of color identity model, and the white identity model. So the people of color identity model, she said, conformity, which is the internalization of the dominant cultures. And then they move into dissonance, which is the encounter status. And in this, there's an awareness of racism that's going to cause conflict. And then we have the immersion or immersion, which is the rejection of the dominant culture and immersion into their own cultural group. And then we have the internalization. So this is the balance between pride in one's identity and openness to others. And then the integrative awareness status. So you have a strong cultural identity that's combined with commitment to social justice. In the white identity model, we have contact, which is a lack of awareness about racism. And then disintegration, which is awareness of racism, which is going to create dissonance. And then reintegration, this kind of brings about a regression into superiority and blame. And then pseudo-independence. So this is like intellectual acknowledgement of racism without deep engagement. And then they move into immersion or immersion status. So they explore their whiteness and their privilege. And then autonomy status, which is an internalized anti-racist identity with active commitment to equity. And both models are going to highlight that identity development involves moving from unawareness to conflict to eventual integration and activism. And I can say for myself that I kind of went through this process because I grew up in a melting pot. There was a lot of different cultures in the school that I went to. And so I kind of had this thought like, oh, we're all equal here. We all came from the same neighborhood. We all went to the same school. We all had the same opportunities afforded to us. So how can you say that, you're starting off behind me when we had the same opportunities? But then, you grow up and you have situations that happen to you and you get more knowledge and you learn more about these things. And so there have been some situations that have happened where I kind of understood that racism is real. And I've moved into that integration and activism stage for myself. There's two other models worth highlighting here. Ponterado's cultural identity development model. And again, with the pre-exposure, the exposure, and the zealot defensive stage. So in the pre-exposure stage, there's very little awareness of cultural issues. And then you're exposed to something, so you're going to encounter cultural difference, and that's going to spark reflection. And then you move into the zealot defensive stage, so over-identification with one cultural stance that's often rigid. And then Finney's model of ethnic identity, you start out in unexamined identity. There's very little thought about ethnicity. And then you move into exploration where you're questioning and seeking understanding. And then you move into a moratorium where you're actively grappling with cultural identity questions. And then you move into acceptance or achievement. So you're very clear and secure, and you kind of have an integrated ethnic identity. And both of these models are showing that identity development is not about reaching one final stage, but about moving through exploration and consolidating it over time. Clients with biracial or multiracial backgrounds are going to face really unique identity challenges and strengths. So they might even be pressured to choose an identity, just one. They're going to experience invalidation from multiple communities, and they're going to face stereotypes like, not being enough of one group. So at the same time, biracial and multiracial people are going to come up with some remarkable flexibility. They are going to have cultural competence, and they're also going to have empathy. So for counselors, our task is to affirm all aspects of their identity. We want to help the clients resist those pressures to fragment their sense of self and validate both the challenges and the strengths that come up with, they're holding multiple cultural memberships. I know my son is biracial, and he has a very difficult time integrating in with the white crowd and the African American crowd. And so he, at some points in time in his childhood, he has tried to fit in with one crowd and tried to fit in with another crowd, and At an older age, he is kind of integrating both parts of his races as his identity. And it comes along with some definite challenges for him, but it also gives him some advantages in some regard. So in counseling, racial and ethnic identity is not an abstract concept. It is lived. And counselors need to name race and ethnicity when it's clinically appropriate, rather than just ignoring it. We want to validate experiences of racism and bias without minimizing or intellectualizing it. We want to map and strengthen those social supports that are going to affirm the client's identity, like their cultural organizations, mentors, peer groups, what have you. And by addressing the identity directly, we're going to create a safe space for our clients to bring their full selves into that therapeutic space. Let's jump into gender identity development really quick. This has also been explored with several different models. So the key model describes white male gender identity attitudes as the non-contact type. They have very limited awareness of sexism. The claustrophobic type has anxiety and defensiveness about gender issues. And the conscious type has increased awareness and openness and flexibility about it. Downing and Rausch's feminist identity model says passive acceptance is accepting of traditional gender roles. Embeddedness, emanation, is like immersion in women-centered communities. Synthesis is a balance between pride and gender identity and openness to men. And active commitment is advocacy for gender equity. And so these models here are highlighting how awareness of gender identity is evolving and intersecting with personal and social contexts. Hoffman created a feminist identity model, and that gives us another look at this, another way of looking at this. So unexamined identity is a lack of awareness about gender oppression. Crisis is where we have an encounter with sexism that's going to create cognitive dissonance. And then moratorium exploration is where we're actively questioning and exploring our gender identity. And then achieved identity is where we're integrating gender identity with personal and social commitments. So like the racial identity models, the feminist identity models are going to illustrate how individuals move from unawareness to integration, and with advocacy often being the outcome of development. So we have to approach gender identity with intentionality. So we want to create a safe space. We want to make sure that space is also non-judgmental so that our clients can share their personal stories and their sexual scripts and their ideologies. And we want to recognize that gender identity is going to intersect with presenting concerns like depression or relational conflict or career stress. And I cannot stress this enough. In relational issues, it's going to be completely different how we address it with women than how we address it with men. And understanding that identity statuses are not on a hierarchy. Each stage is a part of a process. So helping clients clarify their worldview, it's going to be beneficial for them. We need to help them explore both the benefits and the costs of their gender role, and also the other gender's roles. So we want to use a variety of interventions here, cognitive, affective, behavioral, and we need to tailor that to our clients' needs. We also need to engage in a little bit of self-reflection about our own gender identities and what our biases are. So maybe seeking clinical supervision to deepen some awareness of this and avoid some blind spots, because this work not only benefits our individual clients, but it also contributes to dismantling systemic gender oppression. Sexual identity development has also been described through multiple models. So we have Cass's model of sexual identity. So we have the conscious awareness, which is recognizing same-sex attraction. Identity comparison is acknowledging the differences, and this is often with confusion. Identity tolerance is seeking limited community contact. And identity acceptance is like stronger connection to the LGBTQ community. And then identity pride is embracing the identity that sometimes comes with a little bit of anger towards the oppression. And then identity synthesis is kind of an integration to sexual identity into overall self. Troyden's model, however, only has 4. So sensitization is like an early awareness of differences. And then identity confusion comes along with like anxiety and denial. Identity assumption is like coming out and seeking that community. And then commitment is like long-term integration of that sexual identity. And so this kind of helps us highlight the nonlinear, often changing process of navigating a person's sexual identity in that heteronormative society. There's a couple of other models that are going to expand inclusivity. So the inclusive model of lesbian gay identity formation starts with awareness and then moves into exploration and deepening commitment, and then an internalization or a synthesis. The bisexual identity development model, we have the initial confusion, which is like the attraction to multiple genders, and that can feel really disorienting for people. And then finding and labeling stage, or applying labels here, identifying as bisexual and then testing that label socially. And then we have settling into the identity. So there's a comfort level here with bisexuality despite the stigma. And then the last one here is continued uncertainty. The identity may remain fluid, reflecting ongoing exploration. So these different models here are just going to acknowledge, how fluid and complex they are, and remind us that identity paths differ widely across clients. As counselors, we play a vital role in affirming a client's sexual identity. So we want to create an inclusive and supportive environment where all sexual identities are respected. Conducting honest self-examination to uncover biases and assumptions about LGBTQI clients. We want to use skills that normalize client experiences and encourage disclosure. We want to recognize that identity development may not follow linear stages. We want to connect clients with community resources and peer supports. We also want to understand our awareness and skills in evidence-based LGBTQI counseling interventions. We have to be mindful not only of our individual growth, but of the systemic stigma that our clients are facing. Spiritual identity is another important dimension. So there's a couple of models here by Fowler, Parks, Pohl, and Smith that are going to highlight how individuals develop meaning and belonging and spiritual worldviews across the lifespan. So for us as counselors, the key is just to respect pluralism. Our clients may identify as religious or spiritual, but not religious, or maybe they identify as atheist or somewhere in between. So we want to avoid spiritual bypass, like using spirituality to avoid addressing the pain or trauma. Instead, we need to explore spirituality as kind of a source of strength and identity, and a source of healing, while also we have to be sensitive to how it's intersecting with the oppression and the rejection and the conflict. Identity never exists in isolation. A client's racial identity is going to intersect with their gender, their socioeconomic status, or maybe even disability. And that's going to create some unique experiences of privilege and oppression. Like, for example, a Black lesbian woman may face racism, sexism, and homophobia simultaneously. And each of those things is going to shape her experience of mental health. So as counselors, we have to tailor our interventions to identity context and help our clients navigate the complex realities of intersecting identities. It's our task to move from understanding identity to integrating it into our interventions. And that's going to involve gathering assessment cues that are going to highlight identity-related themes. We want to form hypotheses about how identity is influencing the presenting problems. We want to develop collaborative treatment plans that honor our client's identity and that context. We want to document identity-informed rationales in notes and treatment plans. And when we do that, we're ensuring that cultural identity is not just an afterthought, but it's central to our counseling process.